Buy twowayradios.com. Check, check. Buy twowayradios.com.
It's the Two-Way Radio Show.
And welcome to the Two-Way Radio Show. I'm Rick Savoya.
And I'm Tommy Savoya.
And this is the podcast about two-way radios for business and consumer communications. Today we'll discuss how two-way radios are portrayed in the movies, on TV, and in video games, and how the media influences the perception of these devices to the general public. We'll also take some of your comments and questions from our blog and our forum at twowayradiosforum.com. Our show is sponsored by twowayradios.com, the source of two-way radios and radio accessories for businesses and consumers since 2002. twowayradios.com, your radio specialists. Two-way radios are important communication tools, and they have been so for a long, long time. So it's no surprise to find them mentioned or used in the storylines of popular movies, TV shows, and even video games.
Yeah, two-way radios are used really frequently as a medium, either for telling, a story, or using it in the plot as, a backdrop to kind of immerse people in the environment, whether it be like, something like wartime, or, even just showing a character who's a hobbyist, or they're used as mechanics themselves to, further enhance the gameplay of certain video games, some of them more recently than others. And it comes across in varying degrees of accuracy, depending on, I guess, who's making it, what, it was intended to do, if the people involved are really that familiar with two-way radios. I'm not sure if you guys have mentioned on the show before, but, stuff like, a common misconception of like over and out, and that kind of thing in movies and television shows.
10-4.
10-4, and, just, jargon that they feel like sounds radio-y enough, but, really isn't anything people say all that often when using two-way radios, and it just, it makes the character sound cool. It's like when they're coding something, or they're hacking and the hacker says, "I'm in," when, that's not how that works at all.
All right, well, there are three primary ways in which radios are portrayed in entertainment media. They're often portrayed as incidental props in scenes. That's the first way. The second way is as a plot device to kind of help move the story along. And sometimes they're even part of the main theme of the movie or the show or the video game, as the case may be. We're going to cover each one of these one by one. First of all, let's talk about some examples of how radios are used as props. Basically, just kind of in the background. This is an incidental item in the film or movie or whatever it is.
It really depends on, like I've said before, how it's used in the movie. There's a lot of instances in, recent movies and older ones where, the characters are using them to kind of communicate, and using a communication device, and we've seen it like in recent examples like cell phones. Using those kinds of things in movies can be tricky because obviously to create tension, you want to make the characters in isolated positions. If you're talking like, thrillers or action movies or something like that, giving the characters a way to instantly communicate with each other has to be done really delicately. A lot of times the radios are portrayed as like a saving grace for characters, like in movies like thrillers, like monster thrillers, like, I don't know, like Jurassic Park or something. If the characters are like trying to run with away from a dinosaur, they're not going to really have a lot of access to radio stuff. But then you get like, into like a bunker where like the radio is used as something that the characters are. I don't want to say MacGuffin, as in the sense of like it's going to solve all the problems, but it's a very important plot point.
Yeah, that's where it gets into a plot device. But as far as maybe just used as a prop, just an incidental thing where it's like, oh, I'm going to get on the radio and contact this guy, and they just pick up a radio. And I've seen that a lot. A lot of cop shows and movies that use radios for general communications between the characters. That's how they do it. It's like they've got one on their shoulder, a hand mic on their shoulder or something like that, and they just pick up the radio and use it. Oftentimes they're really not even mentioned or acknowledged. They just pick up the radio and they just go, hey, and then talk to the other character, and the characters talk between each other. And in a case like that, when it's just a prop, they're usually used to just kind of deliver the dialogue and interact, for the characters to interact between each other. Some examples of that would be, say, like, for those who are my age or older, the old Adam 12 TV show. The one Adam 12, we got a, situation here, and then they pick up the radio and go on their way. And it's just accepted that all cop cars had radios in them, and generally they do. In contemporary shows, even modern ones, the emergency responder shows, like SWAT, that sort of thing, they use them extensively, but they're still kind of more as props than anything else. And then there's some video games. You mentioned some video games to me, 3 in particular, that kind of use them as a prop and not too seriously, but they're kind of used in there. I think one you mentioned was Arkham. I haven't played any of these, so you're the video game expert. So,
well, I mean, you should know how to pronounce Arkham because you've seen the '60s Batman show, right?
Yeah.
So
Arkham.
Yes, there's usually 3 ways that video games in particular use radios. Those being an interactive medium. A lot of games try to take advantage of the fact that you have normally like a push-to-talk key in like interactive games and stuff. So in the one that you brought up, that is more of like a presentation thing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of like story-based games, like we're talking like Arkham, like the Batman games, where you have Batman, going to Gotham City or wherever it is he is in that particular game, conversing with like Alfred.
Mm-hmm.
He'll just like put his hand to he's got like an earpiece in his cowl, and he's like talking to Alfred. Of course, those could just be like satellite communication.
Mm-hmm.
But it's never really specified. So if it's push to talk, I immediately think like radios, because that's what we work with. But that is one storytelling way. It's just like an avenue for the characters to interact.
Now you mentioned a couple of others to me before, which I haven't played those games, but Uncharted and Call of Duty are other examples of that type of game.
I mean, in the sense of Uncharted is just basically like Indiana Jones, essentially. Think of it like that. So if the characters are talking, they're just talking through a radio to communicate. It's the same vein as what you think of like a movie. But games like multiplayer games like Call of Duty and whatever, a lot of times that is done as a way of like players to communicate with each other, and not so much in like the literal sense, but just like that's how the game presents it. In the sense of like when the character's communicating, you see in like the upper corner, you see the little
so they're on the radio.
It's on the radio, and that being a game about soldiers, So like what I was saying before is that the 3 ways that games usually portray radios is plot device or like an avenue, where they show the characters talking through radios. It's not really interactive. It's just a way for the characters to converse. So the three ways games usually do that is they use it as a prop where characters are just conversing with each other. The second way would be interactive between players. So like in multiplayer games, it is once again used as a prop. It's not actually like what you think of radio communication, but it's using it as a way for players to talk to each other, and you hear it as radio audio. And then the third way would be literal actual implementation of radios in games, where it's like the radio is a like mechanic in the game.
When we talked about the props mostly, but let's talk about how the radios are used as plot devices in particular. And this is where they're used to advance the story in some way. They're not just there to kind of to exchange dialogue between characters and get the banner going, but they're used to advance the story in some important way. You know, they can be an integral part of the action in a scene, but they're not necessarily key to the entire film, but they can be a small part of the storyline. Some examples that I have here for films are like Smokey and the Bandit movies. And, because the CB was used extensively in the Smokey and the Bandit movies, but it wasn't like it was the star of the movie itself, but it was prominently portrayed, and it was an important part of advancing all of the story. And Smokey and the Bandit, a lot of war movies are like that. The movie Contact was as a classic film, and shows such as Stranger Things, the CB radios and things, and Stranger Things. The radios were used predominantly to advance the storyline in some important way. Leverage is another example. I like to watch the show The Leverage, and they use the little earwigs and stuff in that show a lot. Last Man Standing, of course, the hams don't want me to forget that. Last Man Standing is a very important one. Ham radio was an important part of some of the storylines in there. And of course, it was so much so that the star of the show himself went out and got a ham radio license for real, so he could, to add more context and more believability to the whole show. So those are examples where they can be used as actual plot devices rather than just props. But in video game, the video game arena, that's becoming more and more prevalent here, right?
In a sense, big name studios haven't really gone too, deep into it, but plenty of like indie games. I like playing quite a few like the indie titles, smaller titles developed by small studios or individuals, which to stay, relevant in the business where all these AAA studios are, doing their thing, they have to be able to innovate and create very creative mechanics to draw players in. And I think the game that probably does this the most in the terms of two-way radios and how those are implemented is Lethal Company. Lethal Company is a very, well, I don't want to say very recent, within the last year or two, it got very popular in its initial release, and it kind of got a big boom in popularity. Since kind of dwindled down a little bit, but you still find people who are playing it, making mods for it and whatnot. And I've played quite a bit of it with my friends, and it's very fun.
So what's the overall premise of Lethal Company?
Yeah, so basically you're for a team of four scavengers, and you go around with a spaceship on like these alien planets, these abandoned alien planets, and you have to traverse these dungeons, so to speak, or facilities to get scrap that you would sell to get points. And if you reach the point goal for that session, then you go on to the next level. And if you fail to do that, then the game ends. It's a very simple gameplay loop, but it's very successful in what it does because the core of the game is interactivity between your teammates or your friends. I think that the social aspect of the game is really the biggest part of it for me, because basically you are pretty vulnerable in this. The vulnerability plays into how the radios benefit the game. You're very vulnerable in that you have like limited mobility. There's monsters everywhere and traps and whatnot in these facilities, and you have a certain time limit to get the scraps, to find these scraps and treasures and stuff, and bring it back to your ship so you can survive to see another day. What the radios bring to the table is that they bring a very important, a very crucial method of communication that isn't normally present in the game. You can talk to each other, assuming you're not, using something like Discord or Skype or phone call or whatever. Players are limited to communication through voice, and that is like local. So if your player character and your teammate is next to each other, you can talk by using a push to talk button, whatever you may assign it to on your keyboard. But you're limited to hearing them if you're in their vicinity. in the game, when you're farther away from each other, the way you would communicate through long distances is two-way radios. Two-way radios, it portrays as a standard FRS radio. You would order that in the game, use your points and stuff, and use it to communicate with each other in the game. Mm-hmm. And what's really cool about this is that you get the risk reward of having to take an inventory slot in your game to hold the radio, but on the other side, you get to actually coordinate with your teammates in ways you weren't able to before. Mm-hmm. And the way that it portrays it in the game, I thought was really interesting because it is actually very accurate, more so than other titles are. You have a radio and you would have to make sure you're on the same channel. You'd have to, press the push to talk, hold it down. The other person on the receiving end also has to have a radio, hold the push to talk down so you can, communicate, and you can't communicate at the same time. It's very accurately done, and it's done very creatively.
Okay, well, tell us a little bit. What is Phasmophobia? What is that about?
Phasmophobia is a ghost hunting game. So you have a team of 4 people, just like Lethal Company, and you're exploring an abandoned house using tools to figure out which ghost is haunting the area. And it's not, the implementation of radios isn't as in depth as Lethal Company, but it is there.
Okay, well, that's basically how they're used as plot devices in these TV shows and games, things like that. Let's talk about how radios are used as the main theme. This is something different. This is where they're showcased as a central part of the story. They're not just the props. They're used and mentioned by the characters as integral to the storyline, and they're often a crucial element to the climax and the resolution of the story. Some examples that I have here, and probably an obvious one that many radio fans, aficionados are aware of, would be the movie Frequency. And in that movie, you have the father and the son, and they're both using ham radio to communicate across time. In that sense, and I don't want to spoil that, but that's basically how that's used. And before everybody says, rolls their eyes and says, oh, well, that's not how ham radios are used. It's first of all, it's fiction, and second, it's a very interesting premise. But they're using the radios in this time travel kind of thing, in a very, very interesting way. And I thought that was pretty good. Another one is A Quiet Place. Now, Tommy, we've watched that movie. Tell us a little bit how they use that.
Yeah, so A Quiet Place is a post-apocalyptic movie about an alien race that has come down on Earth and responds really sensitively to sound, and they're blind. So basically, the only way they can hunt people is that they listen to any sounds that happen, and they just home in on whatever makes that sound. And basically radios were used as the saving grace for humanity, because they were able to use radios to produce a frequency so intense that the aliens couldn't cope with it. In a sense, I guess it's like using a really, really intense dog whistle for.
And the main protagonist, he had a ham radio shack,
yeah,
right?
He had a ham shack that he had under his bunker, because they all lived underground, because they were trying to hide from them because they were hunting down the human race. And so he had a ham shack, and he was using that. John Krasinski's character was using that to communicate with other parts of humanity around the world, trying to see if they could, find anyone else that was alive. But yeah, it was, again, a very accurate portrayal of what I guess what a ham shack would look like if it was underground, I suppose, which I'm sure someone's got out there.
There's another prime example of this. It goes way back. It's a very old one, but it's and you and I have watched this show numerous times. The Munsters. There was an episode of The Munsters where Herman Munster had a ham radio, and he was calling out on the ham radio, and it was with some pretty hilarious results. And that primary, the ham radio was kind of the primary feature in this episode. It was the main catalyst here for advancing the story. So it was showcased quite a bit. But that's another example of how it kind of can be used as a main theme. But having said that, I mean, we've talked about how they're used as props and how they're used as plot devices and main part of the story or the story itself. But the question arises, how are they portrayed? Are they portrayed accurately or inaccurately, in a positive or in a negative view? Does it because the general public, a lot of the general public, they don't deal with radios on a day-to-day basis, and a lot of people are really unaware, largely, of ham radio in particular, until they're introduced to it in this kind of a in this kind of a venue, in movies or television shows or video games. So. And I would say personally, I think a few of them do fairly accurately portray radios, and a few of them do it in a fairly positive light, or in a situation where it shows how useful a radio is. And examples of that can include, once again, Smokey and the Bandit, and Convoy, and the movie Frequency, as we mentioned before, and Last Man Standing. Last Man Standing in particular really portrayed it in a very positive light and fairly accurately, yeah. But most of these things, most of these movies and shows and whatever, they kind of are, I don't know, I would like to say they're kind of flippant about how they portray radios, and they do it in a very inaccurate way, and some of them grossly inaccurate, because a lot of the people that are writing these things don't really use the radios themselves and don't have that much experience with them. It's like, oh, let's pick up a radio and call, there are some notable examples of this. And Tom, you're going to tell us a little bit about how they're used in the video games here shortly. Before I get there, there's one notable example, I think, that made of ham radio that really kind of got under the skin of more than a few hams. And this was a couple of years back. The TV show NCIS. They did an episode called Trapped. And in this episode, the character, Tim McGee, he was trying to use ham radio to solve a particular crime. And this was not very accurately portrayed because the writers seemed to mix up their ham operating protocols with their CB protocols, kind of mix the two services up quite a bit. And the ham operator, and that was part of it. That kind of irked a few hams, where they're calling, they're giving handles to ham operators and things like that, and trying to tell the public, well, that's how that works. But I think more concerning to me was how they portrayed ham radio operators, because the ham operators were generally portrayed in the show in a kind of a negative light. It's kind of weird and reclusive and that kind of thing. And there are stereotypes, and yeah, I've met a few hams like that. Tom, I'm sure you've met a few hams like that in your day. But for the most part, a lot of hams are really not like that. And to portray them all, to put them all and lump them all in that stereotype is kind of weird like that. It's not really fair. It was not very nice. And then it gives the public a perception that, ham radio operators are these, weird bunch that's sitting there, and in their basement all day and tinker around, and they're reclusive and they're antisocial and all this kind of stuff, and they're slobs and they don't, take showers and whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? So it's it struck me as that wasn't serving the hand community. That wasn't serving anybody very well for the NCIS episode to do that. And that comes down to lazy writing. The writers didn't bother to do any kind of real research, or to consult with anybody who was a real ham radio operator and says, okay, how would they react in a situation like this, or how do they work? That they didn't. I don't think he even tried. But that was one that kind of bothered me, because I saw the episode and it was kind of off-putting. It really was. And there are a lot of situations like that where where radios are not portrayed properly, and the people that are using them are not portrayed properly. And in the Monsters episode, I mentioned the Monsters episode, which I thought was kind of funny. We're talking, he's on a ham radio and he's talking with a couple of kids that are on kind of FRS radios. And so, that's kind of a mismatch there, which is a minor plot point, really, when you look at the whole fact that it's a comedy and it's supposed to be tongue in cheek, and you're not supposed to take any of it seriously anyway. But he did call CQ on the ham radio. Did call CQ, so that was something. But Tom, you brought up something earlier, particularly about the game Lethal Company, that I think we need to flesh out a little bit, because I saw this game. I saw somebody else playing the game. That's what interested me in the whole topic. Someone else was playing the game, and I thought I was kind of impressed with the way they handled that.
Yeah, Lethal Company handles radios a lot better than other games I've seen, and it's because they implement it as an actual gameplay mechanic, and they do it so very accurately. In the game, you get a limited amount of inventory slots, and like I've said before, you're trying to collect scraps to sell. So you only have a limited amount you can carry when you go in there. So if you're taking a radio with you, you got to make sure you're going to make use of it. But what's cool about it is that whereas some games like Phasmophobia or other team-based games like Overwatch or something use radios just as an avenue for people to communicate. A lot of times in those multiplayer games, if you can talk normally, and then when you move away from them, it automatically changes to like a radio filter, so it sounds like you're talking through a radio. And of course, it's for immersion. I get that. But Lethal Company does it a lot differently, whereas you have that proximity chat. You're able to talk with each other through push to talk. But when you move away, that's it. You can't hear them anymore. You'll hear your friend's voice trailing off, and that's it. But in the game, when you use radios, you can use that, to your advantage. But of course, you have to do a little bit more effort to make use of it. You have to make sure you're on the same channel. Both players have to have them, on. Of course, each player has to have one, and you have to. I think you also have to make sure you're keeping battery life, in mind. It has a very limited battery life, so there's penalties to it in the game, which is kind of cool. And given that it's a game where isolation will, be your demise, having a communication device like that is something that really helps in a gameplay sense. Like, you can use one person's in a facility, the other person can be on the ship. You can call them on the radio, like, "Hey, open this door for me," and they say, "Okay." You have to make sure you hit the push to talk. Both players can't be talking them on the same time. And even like looks wise, I don't know if we can throw up a PNG of it on there, but it's a green FRS radio, and it's pretty standard. And seeing it myself, I was like, oh wow, they actually got it right in a medium that doesn't really use them all. Because in some games when they're used as like a story-based thing, it's the same thing as that Hollywood does it, where it's like, oh, does it have an antenna on it? Does it have a screen? Okay, press the button, you can talk to whoever you want. That's all you need to do. It's just a cell phone with a button. When that's not how they work at all. And a lot of times, you can't really fault them on it. I mean, that's just, if they don't use them, you can't expect them to know everything about them. But, just the basic information of, you're using, it's a point-to-point connection where you have to make sure the signal reaches it. If it doesn't reach it, you're not going to be talking. Yeah. And Lethal Company is one of the few games that actually puts that into, consideration, because you can go out of range. If you're on one side of the map and the other person on the other side, you won't be able to talk to each other because you're going to cut out. It's just cool. It's a cool way of doing it. And you also have the issue of like, you're in a spaceship and you're traversing alien planets, but you have radios that can't communicate over like a mile radius. That's a whole other issue in itself. But that's more like a nitpick in context. But otherwise, no, it's really cool how they implement it. It's a pretty good game.
Yeah, I was really, really impressed with it myself. Okay, so there you go. That's pretty much. I mean, we've pretty much covered I think how they're portrayed and the different ways they're portrayed in these venues. Any final thoughts on this?
I guess maybe in terms of like what you mentioned before with Hollywood, maybe it's a research issue. Maybe it's an issue of not enough interest. In either case, I do think it's lazy writing.
Yeah, it's a lot of lazy writing there.
It's portrayed, and showing every radio user as like some schlubby, like basement dweller. That's a little harmful, but whatever. It happens. Stereotypes are a thing. It's not great, but that's Hollywood for you.
Yeah. Yeah, in my opinion, I think those kind of stereotypes and the incorrect portrayals kind of hurt radio and people who use radios in a certain way, because it gives the public who have not really been exposed to that previously an incorrect perception of it, and maybe some of them will say, "Oh, this is not something I'd be interested in," or they may think that, when they're calling us up for a radio, well, I want a radio that's going to go 50 or 100 miles. I want a handheld radio that's going to go 50 miles or better because I saw it on this TV show or in this movie, and then you have to sort of. You sort of have to educate them on the realistic expectations of how these radios work.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a realistic aspect to it too, where it's like in terms of like applying it is like if you're writing a movie, you just need the character to relay information to the other one. You have to keep things simple for the sake of moving the plot forward. You can't really get into the specifics of, he has to use his call sign. He has to make sure he's standing here so he has better reception. It's like you can't really. It comes to a point where you have to simplify it to make it more digestible for the general audience, and I get that. Like it's obviously not something that's like it has to be completely accurate or it's terrible. It really depends on why it's there in the scene. Of course, if the character is supposed to be a professional using the radio, like in a wartime movie or something, I think they should be using normal practice and portraying it accurately. But if it's just something like an offhand thing that is just there for the sake of like a prop, I don't think it's too much of an issue. It just comes down to why it's there and the purpose of it being applied.
Well, what do you think? Do you think that Hollywood should portray these devices more accurately? Do you think they could do a much better job? And what do you think of some of the examples that we've presented earlier? Do you think they've done a good job there? Give us your thoughts. Email us at show@by2wayradios.com and tell us what you think. Well, we have some comments and questions from our blog and our forum at twowayradioshow.com. Our first one comes from, it's from ML Robinette. ML Robinette says, I'm very new to two-way radio. I've had some UV5Rs for a while, but hardly use them. I recently got a pair of GM15 Pros and am having trouble getting them to talk to each other. Any suggestions will be appreciated, assuming I understand them. And that's from ML Robinette. Well, the GM15 Pro, that's a Baofeng radio. The UV5R is also a Baofeng radio. So you would think that maybe they would talk to each other. The thing is, though, the GM15 Pro is a GMRS radio, so it operates on pre-programmed GMRS frequencies on the UHF band. Now, although the Baofeng UV5R, and we're talking kind of the original UV5R now, although it is technically capable of operating on the same band, it's not pre-programmed for GMRS, or at least it's not supposed to be. And I'm talking about the original, once again, because it isn't a GMRS radio. As a general rule, the standard UV5R isn't programmed to any frequencies that are legal for use in the U.S. out of the box. So it needs to be programmed to the same frequency as the other radio. And our next one here comes from Vicky. And Vicky says, please explain the reasoning that young people under 18 years cannot obtain a GMRS license, yet they can take a test and become a ham. I'd love to offer GMRS as an intro into our STEM arc. Thanks. And that's from Vicky. Well, Vicky, to be honest, I really don't have an answer for you on that one because, or not an easy one, because I kind of agree with you in the sense that, there's really no age restriction as far as getting a ham license and becoming a ham operator, but yet you have to be 18 years old to purchase a GMRS license. Now, having said that, I can surmise, I can theorize, this is just a guess, that maybe it's that way because GMRS, it started off a little bit differently than it is now, but they probably just never really updated that. But again, GMRS is basically a service that the whole family can use. So I think they're assuming that as long as you have one adult that purchases the GMRS license and they're the primary user, everyone else in the family is covered. So there really technically isn't an age restriction for using a GMRS license in that way. In other words, if you have a family, mom, dad, 5 kids or whatever, and the kids are various ages down to 3 or 4 years old, technically everyone there in the family can use that GMRS license. It's just that the 5-year-old can't go out and buy a GMRS license themselves until they're 18, but they do fall under the family license. So it's not that they can't use them. It's just that they can't just go out and buy them themselves. Now, really, I would say that's really more of a question for the FCC than me, because I don't make the rules; they do. But I'm just guessing it that maybe they just wanted someone of legal age to be able to actually make the purchase. I'm assuming. Considering the fact that a 5-year-old can get a ham license if they study and take the test, which means they're proficient enough at it, but there's no studying involved in getting a GMRS license. So maybe they just want to make sure that 5-year-old can, can handle a GMRS radio responsibly, and there's no real sure way to tell. That's just a guess of mine, but I would say that's really something you need to ask the FCC about. Maybe they'll change the rule. I don't know. But, Tommy, speaking of 5-year-olds, as a matter of fact, some years back, we know of a 5-year-old that had a ham. Our first ham, what was it? It was our very first one? Yeah, I guess it was our first one. The very first ham fest that we went to, we encountered a 5-year-old kid who, when they were doing the testing there, he took the test and he got his ham license right there. And as a matter of fact, I think we sold him his first radio. It was a handheld, and he just gotten the license. And it was really impressive because I was thinking, wow, this little 5-year-old kid getting a ham license. That was pretty amazing. You remember that? Because you were there. You were in the process of getting your ham license.
Good, 10, 11, 12 years ago for me.
Yeah, I think you were like 13 years old.
I do
at the
remember
time.
there being a really young person taking the test. Was he 5? I thought he was 6.
No, he was 5. Yeah, he was 5 years old, I believe.
I mean, that's still very impressive, for that age.
Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, you were studying to take your technician at the time.
Yeah,
too,
but I was 13.
So, yeah, true. But still, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. I'd like to see more young people get into that, into ham radio like that. All right. Well, I guess that does it for our comments and questions in this episode. Send in your comments and questions to show@twowayradios.com. If you want to know more about today's topic or about two-way radios in general, check out our forum discussions at twowayradiosforum.com. You can subscribe to the Two-Way Radio Show directly from our website at twowayradioshow.com or hear it almost anywhere you can find a podcast. And you can subscribe by email. Click subscribe by email on the Two-Way Radio Show podcast page at twowayradioshow.com. Enter your email address and you'll get the latest episode of the Two-Way Radio Show as soon as it's released. All right, Tommy, I guess it does it for our show in this episode. Before we go, any final comment?
said my piece.
And I've said mine. All right, well, today's show is sponsored by twowayradios.com. Whether you're searching for two-way radios for general consumer or business use, Buy Two-Way Radios can help you find the best solution for your needs. Enter the promo code SHOW at checkout and save an additional 5% off your order. Give us a call at 1-800-584-1445 or enter our live chat at buytwowayradios.com. Well, everyone, as always, thanks for listening, and until next time, for the Two-Way Radio Show, I'm Rick Savoya.
And I'm Tommy Savoy.
And we're out.